The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficulty encountering billions of aeons, and now see it here, receive and uphold it, about to fathom the true meaning, to liberate all beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us continue with the Surangama Sutra. Previously in the Surangama Sutra class, we've already covered on the part where Ananda asked a few questions and then the Buddha replied his questions. Currently, we're studying on the part of causes and conditions and the mixing and uniting. Previously, the Buddha said that Ananda, you are quite clear about that this seeing nature is not a product of causes and condition, nor it is of spontaneity. However, you're still not clear on that this bright, enlightened mind is a production of a mix or of a uniting. When it comes to Bodhi mind, this awareness, was it born out of uniting or was it born out of mixing? Was it born out of uniting with light or with darkness or with emptiness or with solid object? Yesterday we've already studied that how the Buddha refuted Ananda's idea of that it's a production of mixing and uniting with all of those. According to some commentaries, the explanation on uniting and mixing is a bit different. The previous part are refuted from the uniting part, and then later part is refuted from the not uniting aspect. In the Chinese language, there are two terms that's used here, but when they are explained separately, they have a different meaning, which then could be explained in four ways. The first one is uniting, the second one is mixing, and let it be united and then mixed if we do not unite or mix it. So there are four ways of explaining it, or the four levels. Master Oyi and many great masters, including Master Winning, when they explained it, they said the first one is mixing. It's just like mixing water and soil together. That mix into mud, and then that is mixing. 但是我们一般字面上了解的时候呢，就是和平的和呢有这个这个和这个就是也有这个观念和联系的意思吧，就是这样的。So the first one has, so the uniting has some kind of sense of connection or connecting together. And then the second, which is uniting, is to put them together. But according to lots of commentaries, it says that the uniting means is to be pervasive, meaning to cover it all up, like how there's a lid for the box and the lid could cover all the box, the whole box. According to the Tibetan translation by Changyur Chopi Dorje, the first mixing, it is more leaning towards contact, any kinds of touch or contact. The second one is more taking one as a reference, which is uniting. In our following analysis, there are various ways of using logical analysis and reasoning. The reasoning there is similar, but I think there are some.
方式的话呢，就是稍微也有所不同的。
There are a little bit of a difference in terms of the logical reasoning.
这个前面的这个我们
In the previous class, we've already covered on the logical reasoning on how this bright mind is not a production of mixing with the previous ones. We've already talked about that. And then over here, Buddha said that moreover, Ananda, as you are right now, once again, does the wonderful pure seeing nature unite with light? Does it unite with darkness? Does it unite with emptiness? Or does it unite with solid objects? This is the second step of analysis. The Buddha said that, well, this pure seeing nature, let it be whatever we call it, the body mind or the seeing nature or awareness. So this thing, previously you think that it is a product of mixing and uniting. Is it united with lightness, darkness, emptiness, or blockage from objects? The Buddha then continued to say that if it unites with light, out of the four objects, so let's look at how we can follow that logic. So out of the four types of possibilities of a dharma, then if you choose the first one, if it unites with light, then when darkness comes, the characteristic of light is extinguished. How will you be able to see darkness since the seeing does not unite with darkness? So the Buddha said that, well, when you see light and you say that your awareness is a production of uniting with light, but what if you see darkness? If you see darkness, then lightness must extinguish because they are contradictory. It is, you cannot say that wherever there is bright light and there is still darkness. You shouldn't say that. That is not possible, because that is not possible. In that way, when you see darkness, the characteristic of light definitely will extinguish. When the characteristic of light is already extinguished, then your seeing shouldn't be combined or shouldn't be mixed and united with darkness. Since it is not a production of uniting with darkness, then how come you still see darkness? If your nature is a production only united with light, then you would never need to see darkness again. You would never need flashlight or any lamp at all. You don't have dark nights at all. Now, the second possibility, if you do see darkness, and yet at that time there is no union with darkness, but rather a union with light, then you would not have seen light. If you were to say that, well, though I see light, I see darkness, but my seeing nature is united with light, then it is to say that, well, I've always been with light, but I see dark. But when you see dark, your seeing nature is united with dark. And then later, if you were to say that I see light because my seeing nature is united with light, when you see dark, you shouldn't be able to see light because the dark has not extinguished. And when you see light, you shouldn't be able to see dark because the the light hasn't extinguished. Since you would not have seen light, why is it that when there is union with light, you're able to know clearly that it is light and not darkness? If you were to say that I indeed see darkness, and since you do not see light, then it is not a uniting with light. It is not to understand what light is. If you do not see dark, you shouldn't say that at all because you had never seen light. Without seeing light, then how could you say that your seeing is a production of uniting with light? Because light and dark is completely contradictory. If you have not seen true darkness, then you would not be able to see what light is. And if you were to see light, then does darkness exist or not? If it exists, then light doesn't exist. If you do not see light, then how could you unite with light? How could you understand that other than darkness there is a light to be known? In fact, either ways it doesn't make any sense. So after you go through this analysis, you'll be able to understand that the same is true for its union with darkness, with emptiness, and with solid objects. So by now, the 10 ways of uniting the seeing essence with the light has been refuted. Since Ananda thought that this seeing essence is a production of being combined and being united and mixed with the other four dharmas. So through the previous explanations and analysis, by now Ananda should be able to recognize that awareness, this seeing essence, is not a production of a combination with light or the others. Now, to continue, we're going to look at it is not a production of not mixing and uniting with the two either. Ananda then said to the Buddha, World-honored one, as I consider it, the source of this wonderful enlightenment does not mix or unite with any conditioned mundane object or with the mind's speculation. Is that a case? Ananda says that, well, now I'm thinking that this enlightened mind, he's using enlightened mind now instead of the other terms. And he said that this enlightened mind does not mix or unite with any conditioned mundane object, which means the five objects, the five adventitious states, such as the form, sound, taste, touch, and so on. And then, nor with the mind's speculation. The mind's speculation in the Tibetan translation, it is translated as the mental consciousness. According to some other commentaries, it is explained as the 6 types of conscious mind, such as the consciousness of eyes, of ears, of nose, and of mind. That could be possible too. Anyhow, Ananda thought that the source of his wonderful enlightenment does not mix or unite with any of the conditioned mundane objects or with the mind's speculation, which is the mental consciousness. Isn't it the production of not mixing and not uniting? He thought that it is not a production of uniting and mixing, then is it a product of not uniting and not mixing? And then the Buddha started to refute him again. Through this refutation, the Buddha refuted the mixing first and then refuted the uniting later. The Buddha said, now you say further that the enlightened nature is neither mixed or united. So now I ask you further. As to this wonderful seeing essence is neither mixing nor uniting. Does it not mix with lights? Does it not mix with darkness? Does it not mix with emptiness? Does it not mix with solid objects? So the Buddha told Ananda, saying that, well, now you think that
也就是说这个菩提妙觉的话
This
呢，就是非合法
nature,
这个
the
参
seeing
生。
essence
那非
is
合法
not
参
a
生的话呢，我
product
现
of
在呢就开始
uniting
就
and
是问你
mixing.
这个问题。
Then let me ask you
也
this
为什么
question.
样的问题呢？
What's
你
the
现在
question
所
then?
见到的这个精妙这个见解
This
呢，就
seeing
这个精
essence,
妙见解
this
呢， 如
wonderful
果是这个
essence,
非合合而参生的
if
话
it is a
呢，那么
product
就是
of
以
not
这个
mixing and not
这
uniting,
个非明而参生呢，就是就是与这个非明而参生呢，与非而合合，
does it not mix
与
with light?
非通而合合，还是非散而合合？
Does it not
也就是说是
mix with
你这个
darkness? Does it not
非
mix with
非合合而
emptiness?
参生的话
Does it
呢，
not mix
那么
with
就是
solid
也就是说
objects?
是不是合合而参生嘛？那这样的话呢，就是与这个不是明而参生呢，合合呢，还是不是暗而合合呢，还是与不是这个通或者说是不是善，就是那么这方面
So the Buddha posed this question through these 4 aspects.
若非命合，则见于命必有变。
The Buddha continued to say that
如果
if
这
it
个
does not mix with
你
light,
认为呢，
then
我的
between
这个
seeing
就是
and
精妙
light,
觉醒
there
的话
must be
呢
a
就是实
boundary.
际上是
The
不是
Buddha
这个
said that,
明而
well,
合
if you
合
were to
参
say
生
that, if it
就是
is not
不
a
是这个明而
product
合
of
合的，但是它还是有的，
mixing
就是
with light
跟
or
这个
any of
明就
those,
是没有关
then
系，就是非
it
明
has
合合。
nothing to do with
那
light.
非命合合的话，那就是
If
那么
that's
你
the
的这个
case,
见和命，也就是说能见的
between
这
your
个见性
seeing,
和
which
然
is
后
your
这个所
subject,
见的这个命
and the
就是外
object
面的
that
这
is
个光
light,
太阳也好，或者是
let
灯
it
也好，就是
be
这
a
个
lamp
呢
or a sun,
必有变
there
化
must be a
那么
boundary
这
between
个
it.
之间的话呢，就是应该是有这个边界线的就是应该这个有这个辩判吧。辩判的话呢，就是意思就是说，明在这里，暗在那里。
It must be a
就
boundary
明在
that
这里，
separates
见在
the
哪里，
light
明和
and
见之
separates the
间，因
seeing.
为你那个说是我的这个见性呢，就是与明不合嘛，与明不合
Since
的
you're
话
saying
呢，
that
你先
my
要知道
seeing
这个
is
命
not mixed
不
with
然的话
light,
呢，就是你怎么
then you
对
have to
它
know
这
what
个
your
你怎么知
seeing
道
is,
跟它不合
and you have to
既然
see
要知道
what
这
the
个
light is,
要
and
这个
then
命不合的话呢，首
since
先
you
是
said that it's
你
not
见
mixing, you
和
have to
命
know the
命
two,
之
and
间
you
的
have
界
to
限
see
一定
that
要
they're
或者说
separated,
比
and
如
then
说
you
我们
have to
说
see
是
that
这
there's
不
a
是我
boundary
地盘
between
的
the
话呢，
two.
那就是你
It is
知道
just
是
like
你和
when you,
他的这个
if
地
you were
盘
to
的
say,
界限。
this
如
is
果
my
你不知
property.
道这一点的话呢，
If you don't
那
have a
不知
boundary
道
for your
就是到
property,
底是
how
你
would
的地
others
盘是多
know
大，他的
this
地
is
盘
your
是多大。
property? How
所以
would
呢，
others
中间
know
一定
that
会是有辩判，一
how
定会
big
是
is
有
their
这个界
property
限
and whether their property is
那么
touching yours?
如
Therefore, there
入
must be a
其
boundary
地
if you
观
say it
何
is not
处是
mixing.
命，何处是
Examine
见
it further, the Buddha
再见
continued to
再
say,
命呢
what place is
自
light?
何为
What
判
place is seeing?
自何为判
Where are the
那
boundaries
就
of the
佛陀
seeing and
就
the
是让
light?
他就是再继续你
The
详细
Buddha
地
said
去这个
that
观察。
Ananda,
观察的时候呢，
carefully
那么
observe
你
again.
说是你这个不是跟命合合，
Earlier, you
那
said
并
that
不是
it
命
is
合合的
not
话呢，
mixed with
你
light.
用自己的智慧来去观
Since you
察，
said
就
it
是
is
哪一
not
个
mixed
地
with
方呢，
light,
就是是
then
命
use your
的这个
wisdom
地
to
方
make this
或者是明的
observation.
地方。哪一个地方呢？
What
就是是
place
见的
is light?
也就是所见的这个明的这个地方。然后哪一个地方呢？就是这
What
个
place
你的
is
这个见的
seeing?
这个范畴见的范畴。那在明和在就是那么在明的时候，在见的时候呢，就是就哪一个就是
When
什
you're
么
at
是
the
你们
place
的
of
中间的
seeing,
这个界限呢？就是自和为判，就是那
where is
你们
the
之间要
boundary
就是
of
哪些是这个
the
见的
light?
部分，哪些是这个
And
明
when
的
you're
部分
at the
那你
place of
必须要
light,
分清楚。如果你
where is the
分不
part
清楚
of
全部
seeing?
混为一谈的话呢，
Where
你
does
说
the
是
seeing
跟
end
明
and
不合
where does
但
the
是
light end?
明到底是在哪个
Where's
地
the
方？
boundary?
就如果你这个都不知道的话呢，那你怎么知道
If you
是跟见不
cannot
合呢？
find
就
the
是见不
boundary,
合怎么知
then
道
how
呢？
do you
所
know
以
that it
你
is
必须要
not
就是找出
mixed
一个
with light?
就什么地方才算是你们之间的这个界限？
Unless you
如果
find the
界限
boundary in
找不到的话
between,
呢，那你
then
就是
you
合不合
can't
的道
really
理
say
就是
that it
没
is
办法的。你
not
把这个
mixed.
命的事还没有弄清楚的话呢，那你就这么知道是这
If you
个
can't even find the
就是跟
boundary
它
for
不合
light,
也许就是完全合在一起，
if
但是
you
你
don't
就
know
根本不
where light
没有发
is,
现，就是有
then
可能性
you
的
don't even know what place is
下面
light,
说是
then
这
how
个
can you
阿
know
难
that
就是
they're
若
not mixed?
命即众比无见者则
Ananda,
不想
The Buddha
即
continued to
自
say
不
that
知
if there is
其
no
相
seeing within the
所
boundaries
在
of
台
light,
名鹤
then
长
there is no
但
contract
是如果
between them.
这个阿难呢，就是如果这
And
个
clearly,
在明
one
的
would
这个
not
范畴当
know
中的话
where
呢，
the
就是一定
characteristic
没
of
有
light
这个见
is.
的话就是你说是这个名词因为 因为跟我不合，就是在明的这个范畴里面呢
If you were to say
没有
that
这个见的话呢，那这个
within
明
the
呢
boundary,
见呢
within
就
the
其实是
place
他们
of
就是互相都
light,
是踏
there
进
is
就是
no
根本没有
light,
这个
there is
相
no
接触是吧
seeing.
没有相接触，
they are of different entities. You're saying that light and seeing, they're of different entities. There's no touching, no mixing, no contact between them at all. Then how do you know that where light is? Because from the light, your seeing had never been born, had never been produced. Then how do you know light is not there? It is like you were to say there is a vase on the east and another vase on the west. They are separate entities. How do you know each? How do you know where they are? Then how could its boundary be realized? As to its not mixing with darkness, with emptiness, or with solid objects, the principle is the same. You should be able to come to the same conclusion with the same logic. Now that's to refute the first type of mixing. And then the second aspect is about the second aspect of refuting the uniting. Again, as I said, in the Tibetan translation, it's a little bit different. The previous one, in terms of mixing, it is about whether it has contact. And then the second aspect, it is taking as reference. Let's look at the fourth way of making observation, to refute on not uniting. Moreover, as to the wonderful seeing essences, neither mixing nor uniting, does it not unite with light? Does it not unite with darkness? Does it not unite with emptiness? Does it not unite with solid objects? If you were to say that this seeing essence is a product of not uniting, is it a product of not uniting with light, not uniting with dark, not uniting with emptiness, or not uniting with solid objects? You should make this observation. If it does not unite with light, the Chinese translation for both words it sounds exactly the same. So it's very difficult for me to differentiate it. Maybe it's because of my poor level of Chinese. But the observation, it seems that there is a little bit of a difference. Therefore, in terms of the great masters' commentaries, it seems that they explained the second one as uniting, and there's a slight difference. The first one is more like a mix. The mixing is more like mixing water and soil together, which mix into mud. And then the second one is more like uniting. The Buddha said that your seeing nature and the object that is light, if it does not unite with the light, if your seeing nature and the light does not unite, then the light are at odds with each other by nature, as are the year and the light, which do not come in contact. It is to say that, well, these two are completely irrelevant, and they're completely in contradictory to each other in its characteristics. There is some old saying in the Tibetan tradition. We say that throwing the torma to the west, where the ghost that is supposed to receive it lives on the east side. So it means to completely miss the point, to completely went the wrong way of solving the problem. Therefore, the Buddha said that if your light and the seeing essence are two separate entities, then it is equivalent to say that our ear faculty and it is to say that our ear faculty to receive the colors and form that's supposed to be the object of the eyes, because our ear faculty can only receive the sounds, and it doesn't perceive the object of form and shape and color. It doesn't have such opportunity of doing so. Since the seeing does not know where the characteristic of light is, how can it determine clearly whether there is union? The Buddha said that, well, if your seeing doesn't even know where the light is, since they are completely separate entity, just like the West Mountain and East Mountain, they're on the separate different sides. Your seeing doesn't even know where the characteristic of light is, then how can it determine clearly whether there's union? If you don't even know the characteristic of light, how do you know if it is united or not? However, do you know that there is a union or not? How can you differentiate it? This brilliant mind, whether if it is united with the light or not, how can you know that? This is the last way of making observation. As two is not uniting with darkness, with emptiness, or with solid objects, the principle is the same. So, not uniting with darkness, not uniting with emptiness, not uniting with solid objects. In fact, it is the same way. It follows the same logic. So you should be able to understand it. Now, Ananda previously, he first generated some doubts about whether it is the brilliant mind is a production of causes and conditions, and secondly, he started to have some doubts whether it's spontaneity, or is it a mix and uniting, or is it not mix and uniting? Through making the observation, by the guidance of the Buddha, he started to understand that by no way that this seeing nature can be solidly existent. As we studied earlier, as I stated earlier, that the Buddha simply used various ways to refute Ananda's grasping to the solid existence of this seeing nature. Is there an enlightened mind and seeing nature? Yes, there is. But if you were to hold on to a solid existence of the seeing nature, then that is the same as the heretic's teaching. Let it be any kind of dharma, the inner dharma, the outer dharma, whatever it is, they are not existent in the absolute truth, but appears as illusion in the conventional truth. That is the wonderful enlightenment. If you were to think that, well, this nature, this brilliant mind is not existent, in this way, you're just the same as the materialistic view. You're just following that materialistic philosophy. So I think it's quite important for you to understand that, because during our studying and contemplation, if you do not follow this path properly, it's very easy for you to fall into the wrong path. People with only a little wisdom but not reach to that not yet develop that profound wisdom, then it's very easy for them to only understand a little bit, very superficial knowledge, and then started to use their wrong views to look at the Dharma, then started to slander the Dharma. That is really meaningless and quite pitiful. Anyhow, after this observation, we should be able to come to the kind of understanding of how every phenomena in this conventional world are just dreamlike and illusion-like. The Buddha continued to say that, Ananda, you have not yet understood that all the defiling objects that appear, all the illusory, ephemeral characteristics spring up in the very spot where they also come to an end. They are what is called illusory falseness, but their nature is in truth the bright substance of wonderful enlightenment. This is a quite important teaching given to Ananda. The Buddha said that, well, you still have some confusion, you still don't quite understand. What is it that you don't understand? In fact, we can also see some of the understanding of Ananda is that he still does not understand how everything is just a manifestation, just as an illusion. Illusory manifestation. In the Tibetan language, they are separated into two words as well. Just as the Chinese language, it's an illusory manifestation. The Buddha said that all of them, these defiling objects, at the moment that it appears, it comes to an end. This kind of illusory manifestation is called the characteristic. This illusory falseness, rather. But their nature is in truth the bright substance of wonderful enlightenment. This part, for people who studied the Vimalakirti Sutra and the Uttara Tantra Shastra, it should be quite clear to you. Because on one hand, everything's just like a dream, like an illusion. On the other, the nature, the essence of Buddha nature is without wavering. It exists in such a way that without moving, without wavering. Everything, at the time it's born, it ceases. This is the illusion. That is why in the conventional world, we call it like a dream, like an illusion. But the nature of it is without any movement. According to Bodhidharma's bloodstream sermon, he said that all the conditioned dharma are just like dream and illusion. All of those conditioned dharmas are just like dreams and illusions. If one do not quickly find a teacher, then they will easily to squander their life. Though one still have the Buddha nature, it is primordially there, it is intrinsically existent. However, without a teacher, we will not be able to see it at all. Now that we have the fortune to encounter the Mahayana teaching and the spiritual teacher, we have already understood, already received the teaching of how all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, and we already know that we have this Buddha nature. Of course, without these kinds of teachings, it will be very difficult for us to attain liberation. So I really hope that the Sangha members who are listening to this class can transcribe this particular passage of teaching on your own. Write it down, that you have not yet understood that all defiling objects that appear, all the illusory, ephemeral characteristics spring up in the very spot where they also come to an end. They are what is called illusory falseness, but their nature is in truth the bright substance of wonderful enlightenment. I remember another story of a Zen master, a new record of the great masters, where there's a Zen master whose name is Rusong. When he was young, At the time of birth, his mother gifted a monk a monastic robe in her dream, that is. And then later, after he was born, he got ordained at a very young age. He relied on Master Lianqi in Ming Dynasty, and then he started to study the Perfect Enlightenment Sutra. When he was reading that, there's a part of it he doesn't understand. Therefore, he decided to get into a retreat so that he could generate the understanding, because that kind of understanding has to be beyond of conceptual mind. After his retreat, he still haven't understood the teaching yet. Therefore, he went to study with Master Zibo. And then when he studied with Master Zibo, he studied the Surangama Sutra. At this particular part, when he read this particular passage, he asked a question to Master Zibo, and then Master Zibo scolded him very strictly. While he's strictly scolding him, he attained realization and then started to pay homage and prostrate to Master Zibo. And then he said that all the teachings are not should not be understood by the dualistic mind. Later, there are many other stories about him. For example, in the record of the noble ones who take rebirth in Pure Land, it says that at the later time of his life, while he was writing a verse, he passed into parinirvana and took rebirth in Pure Land. In his early life, he studied Surangama Sutra and studied mainly the Zen tradition. And in his later life, he mainly studied the Pure Land school and went to Pure Land after his parinirvana. In his biography, it says that while he studied this particular passage, he attained realization. Since we now also have the opportunity to study such profound teaching, though our capacities are different than that of the great masters. Maybe we don't have any realization at all or any insights at all. But anyhow, we should try our best to recite the teachings where the great masters attain realization at. Just as Pongsu Rinpoche, since he thinks that the pointing out instruction are definitely the key to attain enlightenment, therefore he continuously to chant that for 1,000 times, and then he attained the realization of the nature of mind 10,000 times of pointing out instruction. So 10,000 times we were pointing out, and the supplication of Mipa Rinpoche was 100,000 times, or 1 million times, I can't quite remember. Anyhow, at that time, Pongsu Rinpoche thought that by relying on it, one will definitely be able to attain realization. So we have to have this kind of faith. If we were to just see it as, oh, they're just words, so I can just take this point and highlight that point, and then that's it, and forget about it. That is not very fruitful. Thus, it is through up to 5 skandhas and 6 entrances, the 12 places and 18 realms. The union and mixture of various causes and conditions account for their illusory and false existence. The 6 entrances, which means the 6 roots, and then the 12 ayatanas means the 6 roots plus the 6 objects that's perceived by the 6 roots, and then the 18 dhatus, meaning the 12 ayatanas plus the 6 consciousness. And then the Buddha said that the union and mixture of the various causes and conditions account for their illusory and false existence, and the separation and the dispersion of the cause and condition result in their illusory and false extinction. So all of those things, let it be the 5 skandhas all the way to the 18 dhatus, all of these dharmas, they're simply the production of causes and conditions.
下呢就是已经泯灭的时候呢，就是会这个死去的，就是这个意思啊，就是所以
When the causes and conditions account for their illusory and false existence, according to Master Changzhu's explanation, he said that it means that the causes and conditions are falsely existent. At that time, when there's the falsely existent causes and conditions, makes this combination, there's the compounded causes and conditions, then it will be produced.
它呢就是这个光明和这种清净呢，是这个无离无合的方式存在的。
Who would have thought that production, extinction, coming and going are fundamentally the everlasting, wonderful light of the treasury of the thus come one? We have no idea all the coming, going, birth, and death. All of these dharmas are simply abiding in Buddha nature. The unmoving, all-pervading perfection, the wonderful nature of the true suchness. In fact, the luminosity and purity is always existent. It is unmoving. It is all-pervasive throughout all. If within the true and eternal nature one seeks coming and going, confusion and enlightenment, or birth and death, there is nothing that can be obtained. If one were to seek in such a way, then it is really looking for something that is not attainable at all, because they are simply illusion. According to Lankavatara Sutra, it says that the habitual tendencies would confuse the mind. Therefore, the three existence appears. Originally, there is no birth, there is no extinction. Since there is no birth to start with, there is no extinction at all. In the true nature, they are not attainable at all. We often say, especially those of you who study Madhyamika, we say that everything in absolute truth is completely devoid of the 4 extremes and the 8 elaborations, though that maybe some of you have already understood that or have already attained that realization. However, you should understand that our conventional virtuous roots should not be destroyed, should not be eradicated either. According to the new continuum of the biography of great masters, there was once a master Zhi Zhao, and he studied later with Master Tongji. He studied Surangama Sutra for over 10 years, and then later he attained certain realization through relying on Surangama Sutra. But after attained liberation, after attained realization, he did not just give up practice. Rather, he started to use his own blood to write the 80 volumes of Avatamsaka Sutra and then 7 volumes of the Lotus Sutra. So I really think these great masters of the past, they're really admirable. After writing those sutras after copying and transcribing those sutras with his own blood, he started to pay prostration to the Amrita, to the relic stupas, maybe the relic stupas that's built by Ashoka. And then he offered his fingers to the Buddha by burning his 2 fingers. Also, he started to build his monastery throughout 8 years. At the time of finishing building, at the time of completion, all of a sudden there's a gustly wind. All of a sudden, just within a very short period of time, all the constructions are destroyed. Last winter, there was a ghastly wind in my monastery as well, though that we didn't complete all the constructions, but part of the construction was destroyed too.
修了这个3年以后的话呢，就是他应该就
After his construction was
但是他的
destroyed
最大的这个什么呢？不管
for
是他遇到
a
什么
period
事
of
情
time, that
他对
Dharma
这个每
teacher
天呢
appeared
念这
to
个楞
be
严
quite
经
sad,
这个
and
楞
then
严
he
经实战的
started,
话
he
就
continued
成
to
为这个
build
建
for
筑
another
这个
3
是
years
他的
and
真的
completed
这
the
我觉得是汉地的以前
the
的很多的这
construction.
个大的和有些
But
居士和
whatever
修
he
行
would
人的话呢
encounter,
每天都
he
是念
would
经还是很厉害的
read
有
the
些是
Surangama
念这
Sutra
个法华经就是每天都念
every
有些是
day.
念那个就是维摩诘经啊，就是有些呢就是念这个楞严经
Never,
楞
he
严
had
经
never
念中文
stopped
呢
it.
现在
I
也是
think
寺
lots
院
of the
当中
great
这个有
masters
一
in the
些
history
啊
of
虽然不懂
the
确实
Chinese
现在
Buddhism,
也是有一些
many
就
lay
是
practitioners
但
and
是我们
lots
就
of
是可
great
惜的呢，这个
practitioners, they're
经
very
典
good
呢
at
没有人
reading
啊
sutras.
串
Some
这
would
个楞严
read
经
the
我们这
Lotus
个
Sutra, some
这
the
次的话呢，这个
Vimalakirti
不
Sutra,
知道
some
我
of
们
the
是不是会
Surangama Sutra.
创办就是
Though
传完
that
了以后的话
recently
呢，
not
我也
many
希望
people are
就是
teaching the
每个
Surangama
人呢
Sutra,
这
I
个
really
应
hope
该
that
发
after
愿，就
this
是
time,
就
after we
在各
study
个地
this
方来分享
Surangama
这个
Sutra,
楞严经，应该
many
以
of
后呢有
you
机会
will
就是
start
再
to
次就是
propagate the
在各个地
Surangama
方就是
Sutra,
把这个楞
to
严经的
again
这个
propagate
啊
it,
这
to
个
make
法就是
Surangama
要这个
Sutra
开始兴
flourishing
盛起来
everywhere
啊，就
again,
是这个
to
是应该在
thrive
各
the
个地方的
tradition
话呢，
of
就是
Surangama
应该
Sutra
每个人
again.
都是包括我们这个印书也好，
I
然
think
后呢就是
everyone
就开
should
始这个
use
现在还是比较
your
简单的，就
different
不像以前那
capacity
个
to do
靠这
different
个刻
things,
板
such
的
as
因素啊。然
printing
后呢
books
到时候就是
and
当然
giving
我们这个
teachings
学
and
院
so
的话
on.
现在就是书比较多，
Nowadays,
也不要
when
一
it
买
comes
就
to
是让你
printing
发给
books,
我，不
it's
然我们注意
very
的话呢
easy.
也困难。现在
It
人
is
也
no
不懂这个
longer
年轻那
the
个
very
仪器的
ancient
原因，人也不
technology
懂
or
我们发
ancient
文字
methods
也
to
是很
print
难
books
的。
anymore.
但是你们自己
After
呢
you
就是
finish
在还得这
printing the
个
book,
结缘，
do not
然
send
后
it to
呢这
us,
个去
send it to
去
people
讲
who
这
need
个，
it.
因为这个楞
After
严经
that,
的
you
话
should
最
give
最
teachings
神圣
on
的
it.
地方呢，前
Because
面
the
的这个
Surangama
这两
Sutra, the
卷，
most
因为这两卷
profound
的话，
part
这两
of the
卷应该
Surangama
讲
Sutra
这样
is
的话
within
呢，
the first
一
two
般来讲
volumes,
这个
and we're
它的这个
almost
最深的地方就
finishing
是这
the
个有
first
些
two
魔王
volumes.
不
So we
高
should
兴
be
制
able to
造危
finish
言
it
的
in
话，
2
前面
days.
是比较这个厉害的，然后过了以后，过了
Therefore,
2卷以后的
usually
话呢，基本上
the
是顺
Maras
畅
are
的。
not very happy at the very
这样的话
beginning
呢，
of
像我们
studying
这
the
个
Surangama Sutra,
刚才
since
我
it is
想
the
说的
most
什么呢？就是
profound.
这个日
The
照禅
Maras
师
would
的话
create
呢，
lots
他
of
一生当中就是做
obstacles
了，
at the
他说
beginning,
是
but
自己已
after
经看
that,
楞严经，
usually
已
it
经这
should
个
be quite
就
easy.
是有这个信念，
Anyhow,
就是已经有这个开
what I
悟了。
wanted to
但
say
是
is
后来
that
的话呢，
this
就是
Zen
还要
master
所以
Rizhao,
呢，我们这
throughout
个
his life,
以前上师
by
说一报也
relying
是
on
这样的，
Surangama
就是
Sutra,
就
he had
自己的觉悟，
attained
就是因为自
realization.
己有觉悟，就不要不积累资粮，就是一定
And
要
later, he
这个活到
continued
老学到
to
老，就这个很重要。
persistently
大家应该
accumulate
我
merit.
们这个有时候
That
是
is
确实
exactly
学论的
what
时候呢，
Ponso
我
Rinpoche
知道
used
是
to
一切
say.
万法都
Do
是
not
色，这
just
个无
because
生
you
无
had
灭
attained
不
some
来不去的。
realization
这
and
个
then
道理好
stopped
像是已经
accumulate
明白了，但
merits.
实际上就不
You
能
have
一再而
to
满
be
足，应
diligent
该
all the way
还要
through.
这个
This is
继
quite
续呢，就是
important.
去这
Whenever
个
we're
学习啊，
studying
就
the
像刚
sutras
才
and
那个
shastras,
日照禅
though
师的
that
话
we
呢，
know
就是
that
他就谢了那么多
everything
学
is
生，还燃
without
着
birth,
困苦，
without
还
death,
有呢
without
就是
coming,
这个
without
修建
going,
这个
it sounds
寺
like
院，然
we
后自
already
己的这种念
understand.
诵呢，
But
就是从来也
in
是
fact, it
不
is
间
still
断
very
的，啊，就
difficult
遇
for
到
us
什
to
么都是
carry out
不
our
间断，这个
actions
每天都是念这个释迦
that
楞严
is
经的话，
according to
那
our
看我们这
realization.
个
So
很多
we
人
should
这个尤其是像
continuously
我
to
这样的
study
这个
and to
行
practice
这个
virtuous deeds.
读书
Just
能力
as
比较差的
Master
话呢，这个
Rizhao,
可能
he
念一遍楞严经的话呢，就
transcribed so
照到
many
了就是知
sutras
道，其
with
他
his
什
own
么都不
blood
干，就
and
是只念
made
一遍
offering to
楞
the
严经的
Buddha
话，
and
可能
then
一天
built
都
the
就是很
monasteries
难
and
啊，就
never
是是
stopped
这样
his
的。但
chanting
是
all of these
确实
virtuous
这个
deeds
有了这个供奉，
without
有了这个信心的话呢，
interruption.
应该是也是可以的。
10 volumes of Surangama
这样
Sutra
的就
every
是
day. I
就
think
接
it
下
will
来
be
呢，就是
very
迎
difficult
合
for us, especially for
就
me,
这个
who's his Chinese reading ability is rather quite bad. If I were to read the whole Surangama Sutra, I don't know how long it's going to take. Anyhow, we can see that by reading one time, the Surangama Sutra would take a whole day. So we can see that he indeed put lots of effort into reading it fluently, and then with great faith, it would be extremely beneficial. Let's now continue with the next part. Ananda, why do I say that the five skandhas are basically the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of thus come one? In the illusory net, it also talks about how the five skandhas are just the five Buddhas. Out of the five skandhas, the Buddha first made the analysis of how the form is empty, and then later the other four skandhas, and then that should conclude the second chapter. And today we'll just talk about the form aspect.
他这里这样讲的那个阿难呢，
Ananda, consider this example. When a person who has pure, clear eyes looks at clear, bright emptiness, he sees nothing but clear emptiness, and he is quite certain that nothing exists within it. Now, the Buddha gives the example of the form skanda in the five skandhas. If a person who has pure, clear eyes without any eye disease, and then looks into space, the only thing he sees is nothing but clear emptiness. With his clear eyes without any disease, if a person looks into the sky, just like the sky in the fall in Tibetan Plateau, usually one would be able to see this clear blue sky without any obscurations. If, for no apparent reason, the person does not move his eyes but staring will cause fatigue, and then of his own accord, he will see strange flowers in space and other unusual appearances that are wild and disordered. Out of no apparent reason, without any particular reason, since one's eye is very much focused in the space. According to the commentary, no apparent reason means there's no other causes and conditions. But if one were to stare into the space for a long period of time, the eye would get fatigued. And because of that, in this space, one will be able to see strange flowers. And sometimes we call them as hair floating in space. It is because of the eyes. Or all kinds of disorder, all kinds of illusions, such as horses and elephants. Though that in the Ati tradition, we do have a particular way of sitting and then stare into the space, and in the space there will be appearance of Vajra chain, but the Vajra chain does not appear because of fatigue or because of disorder. Rather, the Vajra chains are the forms of the Buddha nature. Through relying on the channels of the eyes, one will be able to see the form through the space. These teachings were taught in the Seven Treasures and the Ishilama. They're teachings of practicing the 7 days of Toga, but those practices are different than the description over here. So this person is different. This person just keep looking, staring into the space, and after a long time, since eyes started to get really tired and all kinds of illusions started to appear. We usually say that all phenomena are just like hair floating in space. Especially when we studied Madhyamika, especially the ornament of Madhyamika. It is a very important example of teaching, especially when it comes to the conventional aspect taught by Chittamatra school, the mind-only school. The illusions and all the disorders in the appearance, they're unreal. And then the Buddha said that you should know that it is the same with the skandha form. Skandha form is exactly like that. It is unreal. According to Abhidharma and the Gateway to Knowledge, it says that there are 11 types of form in the skandha form. There are the 4 forms associated with the cause. That's the water, fire, earth, and wind. And then in terms of fruition, there are the 10 types of form, the 5 roots, and the 5 objects. So the sound, form, smell, touch, fragrance, those are all part of form. And then there is the form without appearance. That's the 11th. According to Master Xuanhua's teaching, his particular pronunciation has his pronunciation has such a particular dialect where he pronounced form in a different way. How would people with Sichuan dialect say it? Anyhow, over here it says that it is the same with skandha of form. Ananda, the strange flowers come neither from emptiness nor from the eyes. The Buddha started to make the analysis. He said that, well, these kinds of strange and wild flowers did not come from emptiness nor from the eyes. Now we know that the flowers or whatever kinds of delusion that you can see in the space, they are not a production from empty space nor from the eyes. Please pay attention now, because it's a bit difficult to understand. We know that it is neither from the space nor from the eyes. It is something that just appears somewhere in the middle. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if the flowers were to come from emptiness, they would return to emptiness. If there is a coming out and a going in, the space would not be empty. So this flower in space, if this flower comes from emptiness, then it would definitely return back to space, to emptiness. Because there is a place for the production, then there is a place for extinction. We often would say that, well, sure, it comes in from the space and goes back into the space again. Of course, we can say that if there is something that is truly existent. But since there is no true existence to this particular delusion of flower, then how could you say that there is a coming and going, there is a birth and death to it? If there is a coming out and going in, the space would not be empty. So if you were to say that it has a solid existence, then the space is no longer space, emptiness is no longer emptiness. If the flower comes from space, from this empty, then goes back into space, which is empty, then the empty were not empty. Because you were to say empty has a solid existence. If emptiness were not empty, then it could not contain appearances of arisal and extinction of the flowers. How could you say that a space could produce flowers? How could you say that there is a coming and a going within the space, the birth and death? If you were to say that a space has a solid existence,
空化呢，就出来，
then how
然后
could
呢又进入
a
到
flower,
就像是如阿难提
the empty flower that appears in the solid existence of space, and then
本来都是有实体的
once
如果你有
it gets out of that space and then gets into the space
又
again,
出现一个阿难，然后
just as Ananda's body cannot contain another
阿难的
Ananda.
话，那这个是不可能的事情吧，绝对不可能。所以呢，
Since the body of Ananda is right over here,
空化呢，如果
since it is already solidly existent, then all of a sudden you were to say that there's another Ananda inside Ananda's body.
其实这个我觉得
That is not
这个
possible.
楞严经呢，学过阴明的人可能讲得
I think
好一点。
after
如果没有学
people
过
who
阴明，没有
studied
学过中国的
Buddhist
话呢，
logic,
就光是
it would
这个
be
楞严
easy
经
for them
讲的
to
话呢，就不一定
explain
讲得通。
Surangama
从
Sutra.
字论上的解
Otherwise,
释以外呢，它的
it would be difficult because this particular type of logic analysis, it would be difficult for people who have not studied Buddhist logic. So for people who want to give teachings on the Surangama Sutra, you have to understand some Buddhist logic. You have to pass the Buddhist logic courses first. And then the sutra says, if the flowers were to come from the eyes, they would return to the eyes. Well, now if you were to say that the flowers were born from your eyes and then returns to your eyes, the worldly beings usually would say that the fallen leaf would go back to its root. If we were to say that since the flowers were a production from your eyes, then the flower should be able to go back to your eyes then. If the nature of the flower were to come from the eyes, it would be endowed with the faculty of seeing. If the flowers were to be born from your eyes, then the flowers, since it shares the same cause with your eyes, then it should also have the faculty of seeing. Through logic, you would come to that conclusion, isn't it? While the flowers comes from your eyes, then it should be of the same category with your eyes, therefore the same capacity of your eyes, so it should also have the faculty of seeing. It should be of the same capacity like the eyes that could see other things. If it could see, then when it left the eyes, it would become flowers in the space, and when it returns, it should see the eyes. So when the flowers, once it becomes the flower stays in space, and when it comes back, when it returns back to the eyes, then the flower, since it has the capacity to see, then it should be able to see the eyes. It should be able to see things see things while it is floating in the space, and it should be able to see your eyes when it returns back to your eyes. If it did not see, then when it left the eyes, it would obscure emptiness, and when it returned, it would obscure the eyes. If it does not see, when the flower goes into the space, then it should obscure the space. And then when it returns, it should also obscure the eyes. The Buddhist wisdom is very sharp. As I said previously, even if we don't mention the supreme wisdom of omniscience and seeing things, of seeing the nature of things, even if we just look at the analysis and the logic of the Buddha, it is quite admirable. In a worldly sense, if we were to see someone who's very good at writing a detailed analysis of essay, we would feel, oh, that's quite admirable. But when we look at Buddha's analysis in the Surangama Sutra, we should also generate that kind of admiration and faith. Let's look at how Buddha talked about this flower. He said that, well, this flower, If you were to say that this flower doesn't see, then it must be something that should be able to obscure the space. Not only to obscure space, at the time it returns back to your eyes, it should obscure your eye. It should block your eye at that time. Moreover, when you see the flowers, your eyes should not be obscured. Because if your eyes were obscured, when you see the flowers, then you shouldn't be able to see the flowers. That is under the premise that your eyes are not diseased. Then in that way, your eyes should not be obscured. So your eyes should not be obscured at that time. Then why is it that the eyes are said to be pure and bright when they see clear emptiness? Therefore, you should know that skandhas of form is empty and false, because it neither depends on causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. It is not a production of causes and conditions. It is not out of spontaneity. This kinds of skandha of form, they're simply illusion. According to Avatamsaka Sutra, it says that if the disease of the eye can be eradicated, then one would be able to part from the grasping to form. If one do not see all the phenomena, then that is seeing the true Buddha. This is very similar to the teaching to the Surangama Sutra here. Through this kinds of observation, we should know that the skandha form, in fact, they're just like the flower in space or the hair in space. There is no intrinsic nature to it. It is simply because of sentient beings have the eye disease, therefore all kinds of form would appear in front of our eyes. Once our eye disease is healed, is disappeared, then we would be able to see the true Buddha. As it is stated in the Diamond Sutra, if one were to seek for me through the form, through the sound, that is simply people treading on the wrong path. They would not be able to see the true Buddha. It means that parting from all kinds of elaborations and extremes, that is the true Dharmakaya. Now we'll stop here on the Surangama Sutra today.